The old man thought it would be just another flight to see his daughter. He'd made this trip a dozen times before, shuffling through the same security lines, enduring the same hassles. But when that young TSA officer looked at his bronze star and asked if his medals were real, James Warren felt something break inside his chest. What happened next? Nobody in that terminal saw it coming. Not the passengers, not the staff, and definitely not the kid with the badge who thought he knew. Everything about respect. Comment below if you believe every veteran deserves dignity. And hit subscribe because this story will remind you why heroes should never be invisible. Jimmy Warren had been through this routine so many times he could do it with his eyes closed. Terminal C at Phoenix Sky Harbor, 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. The same coffee smell mixing with floor cleaner, the same announcements crackling overhead about delayed flights and unattended baggage. He'd learned to move through airports like water, through stone, patient, quiet, taking up as little space as possible. At 72, Jimmy moved with the careful precision of a man whose body had taken more hits than it cared to remember. His left knee clicked when he walked, a souvenir from a parachute landing that had gone sideways in 1971. His right shoulder sat slightly higher than his left, courtesy of shrapnel that army doctors had never quite managed to dig out completely. But his back was straight, his eyes were clear, and when he wore his 82nd Airborne jacket, the one with patches that had faded to the color of old whiskey, people sometimes looked twice. Not many, though. Most folks saw an elderly black man in worn clothes and made their assumptions. Jimmy had learned to live with that a long time ago. This morning was supposed to be simple. Phoenix to Tucson to see his daughter Cheryl, maybe stay through the weekend, if her work schedule allowed. She'd been asking him to visit more often since her mother passed 3 years back, and Jimmy was trying. It wasn't easy. Flights cost money he didn't have much of, and traveling had gotten harder as his body reminded him daily that he wasn't 25 anymore. But Cheryl was all he had left. His only child, the smartest person he'd ever known, working as a nurse practitioner at some fancy clinic in Scottsdale. She'd offered to pay for his flights, but Jimmy had his pride. A man pays his own way when he can. He'd gotten to the airport early, the way he always did. Military habits died hard, and being late had never been an option in the 82nd Airborne. His duffel bag contained exactly what he needed. 2 changes of clothes, his medications, a paperback novel he'd been working through for 6 months, and a small framed photo of him and Cheryl from her college graduation. Everything else was extra weight. The security line moved like molasses. Jimmy didn't mind waiting. He'd learned patience in places where impatience could get you killed. He stood behind a mother wrestling with a toddler and a collapsible stroller, watched a businessman in an expensive suit check his watch every 30 seconds, listened to 2 college kids complain about their 8 a.m. flight like it was a personal insult. Nobody paid him any attention. That was fine by Jimmy. He'd spent most of his adult life being invisible, and it had its advantages. The bronze star on his jacket caught the fluorescent light as he shifted his weight. He'd pinned it there that morning, same as he always did. When he traveled, not for attention, Jimmy Warren had never been the kind of man who needed strangers to know his business. But wearing it felt like carrying his brothers with him, the ones who hadn't made it home. It felt like keeping a promise he'd made to himself 43 years ago in a jungle that most Americans couldn't find on a map. The TSA checkpoint loomed. Ahead, all metal detectors and X-ray machines and officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Jimmy had his routine down, shoes off, belt off, jacket in the grey plastic bin, duffel bag on the conveyor. He'd done this dance enough times to know which officers were professional and which ones had something to prove. Today, he got the latter. His officer couldn't have been more than 25, with the kind of clean-shaven face that had never seen real trouble and eyes that moved too fast, like he was looking for something to be wrong about. His name tag read Mitchell, and when he looked at Jimmy, his expression shifted into something that made the old man's jaw tighten. "Morning," Jimmy said, the way he always did. Polite, respectful, the way his grandmother had taught him to address authority, even when that authority didn't deserve it. Mitchell barely nodded, his attention fixed on the jacket Jimmy was placing. In the bin, the Bronze Star gleamed against the faded fabric, and Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "Nice jacket, old man," Mitchell said, loud enough for the people in line to hear. His voice carried the particular brand of sarcasm that young men use when they think they're clever. "Those medals real, or did you pick them up at the Army surplus store?" The words hit Jimmy like a physical blow. He'd been called worse things, by better men, but this was different. This was his service being questioned, his sacrifice reduced to a costume. Around him the line went quiet. The mother with the toddler looked away. The businessman suddenly found his phone very interesting. Jimmy forced his breathing to stay steady. In the jungle, panic got people killed. In airports, apparently, it just got you humiliated in front of strangers. "Yes, sir," Jimmy said, his voice level. "They're real." Mitchell snorted, reaching for the jacket with hands that had probably never held anything heavier than a clipboard. "Right. Mind if I take a closer look? Gotta make sure you're not carrying anything dangerous." The irony wasn't lost on Jimmy. He'd carried actual dangerous things, M16s and grenades, and enough C4 to level a building. He'd been dangerous once upon a time when it mattered. Now he was a 72-year-old man with arthritis and a bad knee, and this kid was treating him like a threat. "Check whatever you need to check," Jimmy said, watching Mitchell handle his jacket like it was evidence in a crime scene. Mitchell held up the Bronze Star, examining it with the theatrical skepticism of someone who'd never earned anything harder than a participation trophy. "Bronze Star, huh? What did you do? Help with the mess hall?" A few people in line shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Jimmy felt heat rise in his chest, not anger exactly, but something deeper. The kind of feeling he'd learned to bury in rice paddies and jungle clearings when staying calm meant staying alive. He thought about Cambodia. He thought about the morning in 1971 when his squad had walked into what intelligence had promised was a routine patrol and found themselves pinned down by enemy fire that came from 3 directions at once. He thought about crawling through mud and thorns and the smell of cordite to reach his brothers one by one, dragging them to safety while bullets turned the air around him into a symphony of death. He thought about the 20-year-old kid from Detroit who'd taken a round through the lung and begged Jimmy not to leave him. He thought about the farm boy from Nebraska who'd lost his leg below the knee and still tried to joke about how he'd never have to worry about athlete's foot again. He thought about the sergeant from Puerto Rico who'd held Jimmy's hand while they waited for the medevac and whispered about his daughter's quinceañera that he was going to miss. Jimmy had brought them all home, every single one, and 2 weeks. Later, some colonel whose name he'd forgotten had pinned the Bronze Star on his chest and said, "Good work, soldier." Like it was nothing. Like it was routine, like it was something you could pick up at a surplus store, just checking for anything unusual. Mitchell said, still examining the medal. "You'd be surprised what people try to smuggle through here." Jimmy didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Either you understood what the medal meant or you didn't. Either you respected the men who died earning their honors, or you made jokes about mess halls and surplus stores. Mitchell finally handed the jacket back, his examination complete. "You're clear," he said, like he was doing Jimmy a favor. Jimmy took his jacket, slipped it back on, with the same careful dignity he'd worn through 4 decades of people who looked at him and saw only what they expected to see. The Bronze Star settled against his chest, heavier than it had been that morning. He collected his duffel, his shoes, his belt. The line moved on. The businessman checked his watch. The mother corralled her toddler. The college kids went back to complaining about their flight. and Jimmy Warren walked toward his gate, carrying the weight of his brother's memory and the sting of a young man's ignorance, wondering why he'd expected anything different. He didn't know that someone had been watching. He didn't know that the passenger manifest for his flight had been flagged in a system that most people never heard of. A system that tracked certain names and certain service records and certain honors that meant more than most civilians could understand. He didn't know that a phone call was already being made. He didn't know that respect was about to arrive from 30,000 feet. But he was about to find out. Jimmy had just reached Gate 47A when the announcement came through the terminal's PA system, crackling with the kind of authority that made everyone stop what they were doing and listen. "Mr. James Warren, please report to the gate counter immediately. Mr. James Warren to the gate counter." Jimmy froze. In 43 years of civilian life, his name had never been called over an airport PA system. He looked around, wondering if there was another James Warren somewhere in the terminal, someone younger and more important who actually deserved to have his name announced to hundreds of strangers. But people were looking at him. The gate agent, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and tired feet, was scanning the crowd until her gaze landed on his 82nd Airborne patch. "Mr. Warren," she called, waving him over. Jimmy approached slowly, his mind racing through possibilities. Missed connections, cancelled flights, problems with his ticket, problems with his ID, problems with his background check that sometimes delayed his travel because James Warren was apparently a popular name among people who'd gotten themselves on various government lists. "Yes, ma'am," he said when he reached the counter. "I'm James Warren." The gate agent's expression was strange, not bureaucratic irritation or customer service politeness, but something closer to awe. "Sir, I need you to come with me. There's someone here to see you." "I think there's been a mistake," Jimmy said. "I don't know anyone in Phoenix except my daughter, and she's in Tucson." "No mistake, sir. Please follow me." She led him away from the gate, down a corridor he'd never noticed before, past doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only" and "Restricted Access." Jimmy's soldier instincts were firing. This wasn't normal procedure, wasn't how airports worked, wasn't how anything in his carefully ordered life was supposed to work. They stopped at a window overlooking the tarmac, where a sleek black SUV with government plates sat beside a security vehicle. Both had their engines running. "Mr. Warren," the gate agent said, "I want you to know that in 23 years of working for this airline, I've never seen anything like this." Before Jimmy could ask what she meant, the door opened, and a man in a perfectly pressed uniform stepped through. 4 stars glinted on his shoulder boards. His bearing was unmistakably military, the kind of posture that came from decades of command, of making decisions that affected thousands of lives, of carrying responsibility that most people couldn't imagine. Jimmy's training kicked in automatically. He straightened, his heels coming together with a precision that surprised him after all these years. "Staff Sergeant Warren," the general said, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being heard the first time. "I'm General Harrison, Joint Chiefs of Staff. I apologize for the unusual circumstances, but when your name appeared on today's passenger manifest, I felt it was important to pay my respects in person." Jimmy's mouth went dry. "Sir, there must be some mistake. I'm just trying to catch a flight to see my daughter." "No mistake, Sergeant. We monitor certain passenger manifests at major airports. Veterans with distinguished service records, Medal of Honor recipients, individuals whose sacrifices deserve recognition." The general stepped closer, his expression serious. "Your record shows extraordinary courage under fire. Cambodia, 1971. Single-handedly extracted 6 wounded soldiers from an ambush zone while under heavy enemy fire." The words hung in the air. Between them, Jimmy felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades. Someone new, someone in authority, someone who mattered, knew what had happened in that jungle. "I was just doing my job, sir," Jimmy said. The Response automatic after 43 years. Sergeant, I've read your file. What you did that day went far beyond duty. You saved 6 American lives at considerable risk to your own. You continued to expose yourself to enemy fire for over an hour, making multiple trips into the kill zone to retrieve wounded soldiers. The general's voice softened slightly. One of those soldiers was Michael Rodriguez. Ring any bells? Jimmy's breath caught. Sergeant Rodriguez, is he alive? Retired. Has 3 grandchildren and runs a successful business in San Antonio. Because of you. The general paused. Another was David Chen, Army surgeon, saved hundreds of lives over a 30-year career. Also because of you. Jimmy felt his knees wobble slightly. He'd never known what happened to his brothers after they were medevaced out. The Army didn't provide follow-up reports to enlisted men. You did your job, you moved on, you hoped for the best. Sir, I had no idea. There's more, the general continued. The intelligence your unit gathered during that patrol helped prevent a major enemy offensive that could have cost thousands of American lives. The mission was classified for 30 years. You were never told how significant your actions were. And that day, through the window, Jimmy could see people gathering on the other side of the glass. Airport staff, passengers, pilots. Word was spreading that something unusual was happening. Sergeant Warren, the general said, I'm here because a young TSA officer thought it was appropriate to question the authenticity of your medals. That officer has been relieved of duty pending a full investigation. Jimmy's head snapped up. Sir, you don't need to. I absolutely do need to. When a decorated veteran is disrespected while traveling, when his service is questioned by someone who's never worn the uniform, it reflects poorly on all of us. It reflects poorly on the country. You served with such distinction. The general reached into his jacket and pulled out a small wooden box. Sergeant Warren, by order of the Secretary of Defense, your Bronze Star is hereby upgraded to the Silver Star, in recognition of gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. Jimmy stared at the box, unable to speak. The Silver Star, the 3rd highest military decoration. He'd known soldiers who died trying to earn one. Furthermore, the general continued, the Army has authorized back pay for a service-connected disability that was incorrectly processed upon your discharge. You should expect to receive full benefits retroactive to 1973, including medical coverage and housing assistance. The room spun slightly. Jimmy reached out to steady himself against the window, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. Full benefits, medical coverage, housing assistance, the kind of support he'd needed for decades but had been told he didn't qualify for because of paperwork technicalities and bureaucratic dead ends. I don't understand, Jimmy said. Why now? Why today? The general's expression hardened. Because that young man downstairs thought he could mock a hero and get away with it. Because too many veterans slip through the cracks while people who've never served question their sacrifice. Because sometimes it takes a public insult to make us remember who we really owe our freedom to. Behind them, the door opened again. The gate agent appeared, followed by the airport manager, the TSA supervisor, and Mitchell, the young officer who'd questioned Jimmy's medals. Mitchell's face was pale, his earlier arrogance replaced by something that looked like panic. Officer Mitchell, the general said without turning around, step forward. Mitchell approached slowly, his hands shaking slightly. Sir, You questioned. This man's medals, the general said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You suggested they were purchased at a surplus store. You treated a decorated veteran like a criminal. Sir, I was just doing my job. No, the general cut him off. Your job is to ensure security while treating all passengers with dignity and respect. Your job is to honor the sacrifice of the men and women who served this country, not to mock them in front of a crowd. Mitchell's eyes flicked to Jimmy, then back to the general. I didn't know. That's exactly the problem. You didn't know, and you didn't care to know. You saw an elderly black man in old clothes, and you made assumptions. The general stepped closer to Mitchell. Staff Sergeant Warren earned his Bronze Star by crawling through enemy fire to save 6 American soldiers. While you were in diapers, he was bleeding in a jungle to protect your freedom. The general turned back to Jimmy. Sergeant, I want you to know that this young man's supervisor has already taken appropriate action. He's been suspended pending a full investigation, and his security clearance has been revoked. Jimmy looked at Mitchell, seeing not arrogance now, but fear and maybe the beginning of understanding. Sir, Jimmy said quietly, he's young. He made a mistake. A mistake that could have broken the spirit of a man who's already given. More than his share, the general replied, but I appreciate your grace, Sergeant. It speaks to your character. The general opened the wooden box, revealing the silver star nestled in blue velvet. Sergeant Warren, it would be my honor to present this to you in front of everyone in this terminal. Will you accept it? Jimmy looked at the medal, then at the general, then at the crowd gathering beyond the window. For 43 years, he'd carried his service quietly, without recognition, without acknowledgement. He'd learned to be invisible, to expect nothing, to ask for nothing, but maybe, just this once, he could stand in the light. Yes, sir, Jimmy said. I'd be honored. The general smiled. The first time his expression had softened since he'd arrived. Then let's show this terminal what respect looks like. They walked back toward the gate area, the general's hand on Jimmy's shoulder. Word had spread throughout Terminal C. Passengers abandoned their seats. Pilots emerged from crew lounges. Airport staff gathered along the concourse. Someone had made an announcement over the PA, and now hundreds of people were waiting to see what would happen next. The gate area fell silent as they approached. The general stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly through the terminal. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to Staff Sergeant James Warren, United States Army, 82nd Airborne Division. In 1971, Sergeant Warren single-handedly rescued 6 wounded soldiers from an enemy ambush in Cambodia. He crawled through hostile fire for over an hour, making multiple trips into the kill zone to save his brothers. He was awarded the Bronze Star for his heroism. The general paused, letting the words sink in. Today, an airport security officer questioned the authenticity of Sergeant Warren's medals. He suggested they were fake, purchased at a surplus store. That officer was wrong, not just about the medals, but about the man wearing them. He opened the wooden box. By order of the Secretary of Defense, Staff Sergeant Warren's Bronze Star is hereby upgraded to the Silver Star in recognition of gallantry in action above and beyond the call of duty. The general turned to Jimmy. Sergeant Warren, for your extraordinary heroism and for the example you continue to set, it is my privilege to present you with the Silver Star. He pinned the medal to Jimmy's jacket right beside the Bronze Star. For a moment, the two men stood face to face, the general who commanded thousands and the sergeant who'd saved 6. Then the general stepped back and saluted. The effect was electric. Every service member in the terminal, active duty, reserve, veterans, retired, snapped to attention and followed suit. Then the civilians joined in, hands over hearts, heads bowed in respect. The mother with the toddler, the businessman with his phone, the college kids who'd been complaining about their flight. Even Mitchell, standing pale and shaken at the back of the crowd, raised his hand in a trembling salute. The terminal was silent, except for the distant sound of jet engines and the soft crying of people who'd never seen real heroism honored in real time. Jimmy stood straight, his shoulders back, tears streaming down his face. For the first time in 43 years, he felt seen, not invisible, not forgotten, not dismissed. Seen. The general lowered his salute and stepped forward. "Sergeant Warren, your country owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid. But we can start by ensuring you receive the benefits and respect you've always deserved." He handed Jimmy a business card. "My personal aide will contact you within 48 hours to begin processing your benefits adjustment. Full disability, medical coverage, housing assistance, no more bureaucracy, no more delays." Jimmy looked at the card, then at the general. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything, Sergeant. You already said it in Cambodia, when you decided that no American soldier would be left behind on your watch." The crowd began to disperse slowly, people returning to their flights and their lives. But something had changed in Terminal C. Conversations were quieter, more respectful. Airport staff moved with more purpose. Even the announcement seemed more professional. As Jimmy walked toward his gate, people stepped aside, not to avoid him, but to honor him. A pilot shook his hand. A flight attendant thanked him for his service. A young soldier in ACUs snapped to attention as he passed. At the gate, the same agent who'd called his name was waiting with a new boarding pass. "Mr. Warren," she said, "we've upgraded you to first class. It's the least we can do." Jimmy looked at the boarding pass, then at the woman's kind face. "Ma'am, I've been flying coach for 43 years. I think I can handle one more flight." She smiled. "Not today, sir. Today you're flying like the hero you are." An hour later, as his plane climbed into the Arizona sky, Jimmy looked out the window at the desert below and thought about the jungle where it all began. His brothers were down there somewhere. Rodriguez in San Antonio, Chen probably still practicing medicine, the others scattered across a country they'd helped protect. They were alive. They had families. They had futures. Because 43 years ago, a young soldier from Alabama had decided that leaving people behind wasn't an option. Jimmy touched the silver star on his jacket and smiled. "Some medals you earn in war. Others you earn by simply refusing to let people forget what honor looks like." His phone buzzed with a text from Cheryl. "Dad, someone posted a video of you getting honored at the airport. It's gone viral. I'm so proud. Can't wait to see you." Jimmy typed back slowly. "See you soon, baby girl. Your old man had quite a day." Outside the window, the desert stretched endlessly toward the horizon, and for the first time in decades, James Warren felt like he was flying toward something better. Comment below if you believe every veteran deserves the respect that Jimmy finally received. Share this story if you think heroes should never be invisible, and subscribe, because in a world that too often forgets, we'll keep reminding you why some people deserve to be remembered.